Welcome to the Political News Report, politicalnewsreport.com. You know, the present news cycle moves fast, and just in case you missed it, here's a story that came through our curated news feed recently that's worth a closer look. A recent story from ZeroHedge.com about a story from Breitbart delves into the migrant crisis and touches on something far more important about that subject than is typically discussed or reported. Back on June 10th, Zero Hedge ran this story. Mexico refuses to name international figures bankrolling migrant caravans. The story says that after freezing the bank accounts of 26 individuals and entities amid a probe into human trafficking, Mexico has refused to name the account owners, some of which appear to have originated in the U.S., UK, African nations, and Central America. According to the story, as part of Mexico's crackdown to avoid U.S. tariffs, Mexican authorities also arrested 2 caravan organizers reportedly tied to the U.S.-based group Pueblos Sin Fronteras. This organization helps migrants illegally cross into America, and according to officials, the groups would demand money from some of the migrants. Now, this is very different than what Pueblos Sin Fronteras presents itself to be. If you go to their website, pueblosinfronteras.org, you'll find that it's a little bit different from what you would expect from a nonprofit organization's website. Those are generally upfront about where their money's coming from and their organizational structure. For example, they'll specify that they're a 501c3 type organization, etc. There's no About Us link even in their menu. There is an About Us section on the home page, but aside from some fuzzy language about raising awareness of human rights abuses against migrants and refugees, it doesn't really go into much detail about who they really are and where their money's coming from, although there is a very predominantly displayed link to donate, which again doesn't really tell you much about the organization, about who you're sending money to. Now, this video isn't about trying to expose Pueblos Sin Fronteras, although it looks like they would be worth a closer look. This video is really to talk about the larger picture about what's going on with the migrant crisis. Back to the story from Zero Hedge. What's more, law enforcement sources revealed that the investigation found 4 sanctioned accounts linked to human smuggling groups that are loyal to Mexican drug cartels in border towns. Usually, the migrant crisis is portrayed not only in the media but by elected officials, bureaucrats, and it seems anyone you talk to even, in a dichotomy that falls along left versus right political lines. This Zero Hedge article touches on the fact that players with deep pockets are involved, and for reasons other than the concerns of political refugees. We're going to talk a little bit about both sides here. Let's start with the political left. We'll talk about the political right in just a moment. But on the left, you have this notion that people coming predominantly from Latin America into the U.S. and also from the Middle East and Africa into Europe are basically refugees fleeing horrible conditions in their homelands and should be welcomed into the U.S. and Europe with open arms and without question. Because these people tend to be non-white, any criticism of this approach to dealing with the migrant crisis is automatically dismissed as racist, at least if it's raised with somebody on the left. This waving of the race card is an effective and frequently used tool by today's political left to preclude any legitimate debate on any topic, not just the migrant crisis, that may touch on race relations. On the political right and the alt-right, well, they tend to legitimize the left throwing up the race card by coloring all of these non-whites trying to enter the U.S. and Europe as bad hombres, as our current president has put it on more than one occasion. While the evidence is undeniable that some nefarious and dangerous characters are crossing in from these countries, they are also clearly a minority. But as the saying goes, it only takes one bad apple. But with all of the political posturing by actors on both sides on the left and the right, their claims to want what's right for the people they claim to represent, their positions that they're advocating really belie the actual truth. That truth is that what they really care about is running their political games and manipulating the public rather than finding a real solution to these problems. Because if the lefties actually cared about these migrant refugees, and if President Trump and the people on the political right cared about keeping out the so-called bad hombres, then they would be addressing the biggest reason behind why these people are fleeing their homelands. And that's what's talked about in this article from The Conversation back in October. The truth that is never touched on by our so-called leaders and influencers is that the U.S., with some prodding and assistance from other countries like Great Britain and also Israel and Saudi Arabia, has interfered with the natural right to self-determination that these countries possess, and has done so for decades under the guise of amorphous boogeymen like the war on drugs or the war on communism and, of course, the war on terror. This interference has installed and propped up the worst kind of leadership in these countries, and sometimes involved outright military aggression that has laid some of these countries to waste. Military aggression by the United States. This has resulted in destabilizing these entire regions, both politically and economically, and making these countries awful places to be and the kinds of places that create refugees. Some want to view such abuses of U.S. strength and Western strength as unintended consequences of well-intended leaders. But this view, just like the positions of the left and the right on the migrant crisis itself, ignores the fact that the interference into the affairs of another country, including economic sanctions, as the U.S. has been doing to many countries, in particular Venezuela and Iran, is both illegal and immoral, without that target country at least first posing an immediate military threat. Look, do you think these people really want to leave their homes, their families, their cultures, everything they've ever known? Do you realize how bad things have to get before somebody who doesn't have a car, can't afford a plane ticket or even a bus ticket, to get to a point where they're willing to set out on foot for another country that is totally a different culture from their own, and to leave everything behind? As the deep pockets exposed behind the surge in the migrants in the Zero Hedge article that we started off talking about today, the left and right don't talk about the real cause of the migrant crisis not because they don't know. It's because this is all just a game to them. And these migrants, as well as those of us living in the countries they are trying to migrate to, are just pawns to be manipulated. If you found value in this content, then help out by giving a thumbs up and a share, and also subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And remember, the political is personal.